I'm Matthew Buckley Smith, and you're listening to Slee Rickets. Thank you, everybody, for listening. I got a fair amount of housekeeping this week, so I'm going to try to blow through it as quickly as possible. The big news is that we finally have t-shirts. It took a little bit of doing, but they look good. They are at TeePublic. I'll put a link in the show notes to them, and maybe I'll try to put one somewhere else, but they're very simple, very clean. And the way TeePublic does it, you can pick whatever color or style of t-shirt or whatever you want. There's a lot of options, but I just got a regular black t-shirt, and it looks pretty good, and it's pretty soft, and they do a nice job there. So for those of you who have been wanting one, you can now get it. Also, if you have not yet taken a look, go to sleerickets.substack.com and check out The Secret Show. There are now 5 episodes up. I just added a new one, a really good conversation I had with Cameron after we discussed the Martinez affair. I will listen to the end of this episode, and I will put a little preview of one of the episodes, the one I did with Brian most recently up there, so you can get a sense of what you are missing if you have not yet subscribed. Finally, what did I want to say? Oh, finally, yeah, just thanks to everybody for listening to the regular show, to whatever, for all of your support, all of your notes. I've gotten a lot of notes from people recently, and I appreciate all of them. It means a lot. So all of your interaction and support is definitely noted and appreciated. And if you would, just take a moment sometime this week to mention the show to somebody you think might like it. Word of mouth really is how the show gets around, and y'all have been doing a pretty great job of that thus far. So please do keep it up. Just tell one friend. And I think people seem to like the show or get entertainingly mad at it. And either way, I'm gratified. I still had this challenge I want to put out, but I'm going to have to wait because this episode's going to be over long otherwise. So this week, I had a really fun conversation with Alice about an issue of Poetry magazine that came out in 2009. I'll put a link to it in the show notes, of course. But in it, in addition to some poems and some letters and reviews, Christian Wyman, the editor at the time, included 8 poetry manifestos written by poets who were, I think they were sort of all regularly publishing in poetry. Some dear to the show included. And Alice and I went through all of them, talked about them. She wrote her own manifesto, and then I have something that's sort of not. Instead of writing a manifesto, I solved the problem of figuring out what poetry is, whether a poem is good or not, for all time, and we can all go home now. But it was a really good conversation. Alice was a delight, as she always is, and I'm not even putting her name on the show. I'm not even listing her name in the show notes because she's just part of the show now. So. I'm listing her defunct Twitter handle instead until she tells me otherwise. But of course, as always, you should go check out Alice's podcast, Poetry Says. And before we get to that conversation, I did want to note that Joshua Megan, who wrote the first manifesto that we talk about, is going to be teaching a class on the foundations of free verse with Brooklyn poets. He's going to be teaching this over the summer, July 10th to August 14th, but I'll include a link to it. Oh, it's sold out. God damn it. I told him I would plug it, and now it's sold out. Wait, is that current? Well, you could have taken a class with Joshua Megan, but now it's too late, sucker. Sorry about that. Damn it. All right. Anyway, let's get to my conversation with Alice right now. So I asked you to look at these things. I realized I had only read a couple of them originally. And so some of them were new to me, and some I had forgotten about and then wished I'd forgotten about. So in 2009, on the 100th anniversary of the Futurist Manifesto, Poetry magazine invited, I'm not sure exactly how it happened, but they had 8 poets, one of which was a kind of a group of poets, submit poetry manifestos. And they got some interesting results. Some were really good, some were terrible, and some were, I think, in the middle. It was sort of my feeling. I don't know how you felt, but we read them. There are 8 of them. And why don't we, so these were, they put them in order in the magazine. The first one is by Joshua Megan. The second one is by Michael Hoffman. The third one is by Charles Bernstein. The fourth one is Angie Malenko. The fifth is D.A. Powell. The sixth is Thomas Sayers Ellis. The seventh is A. Stallings. And the eighth is Hate Socialist Collective, which in this case was represented by Joshua Clover and Juliana Spar. Just starting with that, because there are a couple other things in this issue I might want to bring up, but what were your impressions? What'd you make of all this?
Yeah, well, similarly, some of them I loved. A few I really struggled with, and there were a few in the middle. But I wanted to know, before we dive in, what was happening around this time in Poetry Magazine. This is Christian Wyman era.
This is peak Christian Wyman, yeah.
So it feels like a lot of these manifestos are a little bit on the attack against Poetry Magazine, and I wondered about that.
Yeah, the Hate Socialist Collective in particular is like very, very hostile, like ostentatiously hostile to Poetry Magazine specifically. So Christian Wyman, do you know his poetry at all?
I read The Ice Storm all the way through this week, kind of in preparation for this, and I still have no idea what I think about it.
Yeah, he writes often in regular meter and rhyme, not always, and he is also a very religious person. He is associated with the New Formalists, though I think one part of Poetry Magazine's reputation during this time, which was, I believe, like I think he may have been one of the first editors to be able to make use of all that Ruth Lilly money. The magazine was known for having a more formal or conservative or sense-making leaning. Again, like, from my perspective, it does, I guess it doesn't take much for you to be considered conservative or formal, because, it's like even a little, it's almost like a one-drop rule. At the time, this was still, as you get the sense from the Charles Bernstein manifesto, the latter day language poets were still held in high opinion and very influential. So there was a sense of this was the era, I want to say, of the Ron Silliman feud against the School of Quietism, the School of Quietude, I think he called it. I can't remember. Quietism's a political thing, but I think he that was not an accidental conflation in that case. The other thing I'd totally forgotten about Poetry Magazine was that it used to just have tons of interesting prose in it. Like, even apart from the manifestos, there's just like a ton of reviews in this, and the reviews were often contentious, and there's like a series of really fiery letters to the editor and then responses from the writers in the magazine. So there was a lot more. This was also an era when they would sometimes like bring in people who you kind of wish they hadn't done. Like, I remember they brought in like Nico Case. It was like, Nico Case is great. But then they brought her in, and they're like, Nico Case, tell us about poetry. And I was like, maybe not that. Like, she's so great at what she does, but I don't really want to hear her opinions on poetry. So I feel like there was a lot more conversation in the magazine about the nature of poetry. And this is maybe the headiest example of that.
Yeah. Yeah, and it might seem like a small thing, but people also put comments under these manifestos.
Oh my God, I totally missed that. Oh, wow.
I don't think that would happen anymore, not just because most of that has moved to Twitter, but also because nobody writes comments.
Right.
That's crazy.
You know what? I totally forgotten. I remember there was at least some articles where like the authors would get into the comments in an intense way. I totally had forgotten about that. Yeah. And I missed that when rereading. I didn't even look. Any highlights from the comments?
Well, as we go through, I think maybe I can sort of point to a few of those, but maybe let's start with Joshua Megan's the final manifesto.
This is pretty short. Do you want to just read the whole thing?
Yeah, I'd love to. The final manifesto by Joshua Megan. 1, we see you. 2, we know who you are. 3, your ideas are worthless. 4, your aesthetic is stupid. 5, your technique is a welter of narcissism, superstition, and habit. 6. All your little tiny ideas, all your whoring attempts at creation, and you yourself are nothing. Nobody wants you. We despise you. It's in our nature. 7. You should be kept as a pet.
So good.
8. You are a Philistine, the Paul Bunyan of decadence, an acromegalic fraud. 9. You are a minnow, a speck, a stain. 10. The genre humane is sick, and you are to blame. 11. You are a necrophiliac. 12. You are a museum of irrelevance. 13. It will take years to make art vital and important again. 14. You are from this moment forbidden. 15. As the Italians say, parla quando piscia la gallina. Speak only when the hen is pissing. 16. We are here now. 17. Our aesthetics is empirically grounded. 18. Our taste will be raised to principle. 19. You and your band of jays will be flushed out. 20. Yes, art is resurrected today. Victory is ours. 21. History will forget you and salute us. 22. Here you are, and here is oblivion. 23. This is the final manifesto and the only one.
Yep. I mean, it's almost just like a great diss track in some ways.
Yeah, but so the comments on this are a little bit, at first people are happy with it, and then there's one from like 3 years later where somebody comes in and just takes it completely in the spirit that is not intended, and he's really offended. But when I read this, and I can't really separate out the little that I know of Josh and what he's written here, but to me, this sounds like Josh talking to himself. It really sounds as if what he is, he's not pointing this at anyone except for his own. I think sometimes he finds himself a little ridiculous.
Yeah.
Sorry, Josh. But I don't know. I feel like that might be true. And all of this is like, yeah, it's pointed back at him.
Yeah, it does have it has the relentless intensity of self-loathing. I think you're right.
Yeah, exactly. You couldn't hate somebody else this much.
Yeah, it takes too much effort. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's too thorough.
Exactly. So this is far and away my absolute favorite of the manifestos.
Yeah,
but again, it's a little bit hard for me to know how objective I'm being.
I think it's terrific, and I think it's totally the most stylish. I was going to say like there's a lot of style on display, but I think like there are others that are very mannered. This feels like it's just a successful style.
Yeah, and it's got this nothing to lose quality about it. It's just like, fuck it. This is how I feel. Yeah, it's a pretty hard act to follow, and I don't think anything really comes close.
Yeah,
but
it is like the one element of it that is, because it has the poet's quality of like profound self-loathing paired with sky-cracking arrogance, and that's apparent in the title, right? It's like, I hate myself more than anyone would ever hate myself. Also, nothing will follow. Like, fuck you all.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty great.
Yep. All right, so we love this. We love it.
Mm-hmm. And then the second is Michael Hoffman's Manifesto of the Flying Mallet.
Yeah. This one isn't bad at all. This is more kind of a traditional, this is what I think about poetry and how poets should be in the world.
Yeah. It almost feels like a poetry orientation. Like, do you have that at like your college's orientation? Where you like come on the first day and
yeah,
like, here's where everything is.
Yeah. O-week.
O-week, yeah. So that's a little bit what this is like. It's like, hey, here's what it is. Here's what happens.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's no uniform, no team shirt, no plan or no battle or plan of battle, no weapons, no organization, no hierarchy, no ranks or badges except for homemade ones that don't count. Enemies and detractors everywhere.
All there is confusion, pretense, contradiction, and instinct.
Each poem is the line. Yeah, it's funny. The line they pulled: poetry is delayed, instant, unending, brief, electric, tiny. Each poem is an insurrection against the world before it existed, or a desertion from it. That I understand almost not at all.
Yeah, no, that's not a bit that I really resonated with.
Yeah, it was funny.
Yeah.
They pulled that. And then here's the interesting thing. There are no plurals, only chance or temporary agglomerations. The only plural forms are what Wallace Stevens, plural himself, as you might think, referred to as functionaries or hacks, and Lou Reed as Jim Jims. I'm not really familiar with Lou Reed's personal lexicon of slang, but I think I read that as like there are no like people doing, there are no like true schools or no like camps. There are no like people who are really actually on the same team or doing things at the same time. They're just sort of collisions and intersections or like ranked derivativeness.
Yeah, I think that's what he's getting at with the word plurals. But it's interesting how negative both of these are to start with, right? Like,
Yeah.
so that's why I ask about the Christian Weiman thing. Like, what's the mood of poets being asked to write a manifesto for Poetry Magazine and then coming back with, well, everything is meaningless and stupid.
Yeah.
I don't feel like those would be written today, you know?
No, I think that, like, there's two enormous differences, I think, between like this set of manifestos and the manifestos you would get today is that in this one, only one of them is really overtly political. And that one still is pretty theatrically so. And out of the 9 authors involved in this, I believe one is not white. So I think that's another like pretty big difference from what if you were to do a version of this today. Yeah, like there's a lot of you're right. Like a lot of these have a very negative form or a kind of a gripey tone. And even the one that is very political is mostly negatively so. But I thought like reading Manifesto of the Flying Mallet, I thought like as a kind of a series of statements about poetry, I thought like, yeah, I basically agree with this. It seems like
yeah. I think I agree with it on bad days.
Yeah. I wonder about our good to bad day differential between the two of us. I wonder how
we should track that.
that lines up. And then do you want to move to the next one?
Yeah, so Charles Bernstein, Manifest Aversions, Conceptual Conundrums and Implausibility, Deniable Links. I can barely get through the title.
Oh man, yeah.
And it's really good for me to read something like this and to feel the confusion, the boredom, because this is exactly the kind of shit that I try to get away with, and I can't.
Try to get away with, or tried it to?
I probably still, I'm still trying. I'm still trying to get away with this. I can't, and I really don't think Charles does.
What do you, and by this kind of stuff, what is it that specifically?
Nonsensical collage.
Okay, all right. Nonsensical collage. So I don't. So yeah, like the opening statement. Some of these are pretty good lines. I love originality so much I keep copying it as the opening, and a lot of it is an elaboration on that idea. It seems to be a sort of a desperate avoidance of commitment. He even includes like language poetry with all the equal signs between the letters. And then after a colon, he says, a loose affiliation of unlike individuals, which seems to be, I feel like that is protesting too much. But a lot of it has that feel of like, oh, you think I'm over here, but I'm really over there. Oh, but I'm not over there either. I'm like, all right, man, that's cool. And it just goes, it keeps going on. It's so long. It's so many of these.
It's so long. It's way too long. That's the thing, though, when you get into this mode, if everything is worth including, then it's very hard. Like, it's like when musicians start being their own producer.
Yeah. And it just reminded me of the damning assessment Ryan made of language poetry, 20 years ago, which was like, insofar as like one of the major goals of language poetry is to demonstrate the sort of the ever shifting untrustworthiness of language and conventional communication. Like there only needs to be one language poem. Like if you have one successful language poem that truly demonstrates that, like you don't need to publish any others. And this feels like it's more material in that mode, like more, I mean, so much of language poetry, at least that I encountered at the time, felt like this again, like language betrays us again and is and is silly again. Like any assertion, any convention, any commitment can only be, has to be undermined again, and that's every like again, like you feel like you just do that once and do it really well, and then that's enough.
Well, I don't know. I mean, you could probably apply that to pretty much any mode, though, couldn't you?
Maybe so. Maybe if it were, it would be. Maybe part of my objection is like it also seems not fun. Like if it were that but fun, like great, okay, yeah.
Well, I feel like the thing that it sometimes misses, and not always, because there is a Bernstein poem that I really like called "In a Restless World Like This Is," and there's a lot of Silliman that I really like as well. I like them when they allow for a little bit of sincerity. Mm-hmm. And there's no sincerity at all in this.
There's one weird moment of sincerity, I think, which is just down toward the bottom. There's a longer. Most of these are just sort of like one line things, like "there's no depth to the depth" in italics, because that really needed to be in italics. But then he says, "The ceremony of sorrow is performed with a measured, defiant acknowledgement that makes words charms, talismans of the fallen world. Poetry is a holding space, a folded grace in which objects held most dear disappear, returning as radiant moments of memory's forgiving home." And if I had any doubts about the sincerity of that, he then said, in brackets, in italics, he then says, "For Aquila Oliver." So he dedicates just that one statement to this person, which I read as a moment of sincerity, but also felt like, why is this for us? Like, do we need to read this?
Yeah, I that really stuck out like a sore thumb to me. It's just like, what? Okay, I guess I need to figure out who that person is.
But like, I can't necessarily follow that series of like the two sentences that precede it. But I can tell. It seems like he really means what he's saying there.
Absolutely, yeah.
I don't know. I don't know what he means, but he means it.
Great.
Yeah. So that's that one, and boy, it's long. Yeah. And then the fourth is Angie Malenko, and it's called "The 80s, Glory of," as if it were, I guess, listed in an index is kind of the format of the title.
This one definitely has my attention for a number of reasons.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, good, because I was maybe most confused by this one.
Okay. Yeah. It is. It does get a little confusing, but first of all, Angie very much has my attention because she's making a Tori Amos reference in the title.
Oh, is that the Tori Amos? Oh, okay. All right. Which I missed.
Yeah, Glory of the 80s is an amazing Tori song.
Oh, okay.
Not that Angie will ever forgive me for everything I said last time I was on here, but if you ever want to talk to me about Tori Amos,
all right.
I would love that. But the first sentence just absolutely cuts me to the core. She says, "These days, everybody everywhere, under 50, younger poets, seems to allude knowingly to Frank O'Hara's personism and deploy with gusto the chatty irony, the pop sagesse he pioneered." So that's my entire project totally punctured, and I can't ever write again. She's just completely seen through everything I've ever tried to do. And
in 2009.
In 2009, yeah, like before I even started writing, and she was like, "Here's what you're about to do, and you're wasting your time."
So, yeah.
So, fuck.
Well, all right, so I read Personism today. Maybe I'd read it before, but if I did, I didn't really remember it at all.
Yeah, I've read it a few times. It's never really stuck.
Yeah. Mostly what seemed like the strongest impression is just the tone.
Yeah.
Which she does characterize pretty accurately, I think.
The chattiness,
chatty irony, and pop sagesse. And it's sagesse, I don't know French.
I don't know.
Personism, a movement which I recently founded and which nobody knows about, interests me a great deal. Yeah, and even when he defines it, well, he doesn't really define it. He says, "But to give you a vague idea, one of its minimal aspects is to address itself to one person other than the poet himself, thus evoking overtones of love without destroying love's life-giving vulgarity and sustaining the poet's feelings towards the poem while preventing love from distracting him into feeling about the person." He kind of elaborates, but it seems sort of to be, if anything, just saying like write a poem to a specific, like write epistolary or apostrophic poetry. But then most of it is this kind of tap dancing. So what you felt implicated by this reference. What is it that, what is your relationship to this essay or to this mode, or why would that cut you to the core?
Because I am always writing to a specific person. Like, it's always epistolary for me. And I guess I thought that was a way to be more honest and maybe, keep myself somehow accountable to something. I'd also just really like some of O'Hara's poems a lot. And so...
Yeah.
And love the relaxed kind of wandering mode that he's sometimes writing in, and just, I guess, wanted to emulate that like so many other people.
Yeah, there is something like in his kind of light touch and refusal of sentimentality that feels like it has to do with maybe the way you've characterized Australian poetry.
Yeah, I think that he had a huge, like, he and Ashbery together, I think, are so much in the water here that you can barely even separate it out.
Like fluoride. Yeah, okay, so the title says 80s glory of, and then a couple times in the article she says, inventing a new tone is no small thing, though grander projects beset us these days, book-length projects, lipograms, and variations on macaronics and hybridity, it's like we're stuck in the 80s. And I think maybe one other time she says something about the 80s. I don't know what she's talking about, though.
No, I couldn't follow that. I couldn't follow. I do hope that you get to talk to Angie and ask her about this, because I couldn't figure that bit out.
Is it like just what it felt like to be in the 80s in poetry in America? Like, is there must have been a prevailing tone then? Is that what that means? Because even just the fact that there is a song with that title is helpful, because I didn't even know that. But is the song illuminating as a key to this at all?
It's a very nostalgic song. It's very positive about the 80s, but which Angie doesn't seem to be going for.
No,
I
but
don't know.
But she seems to be taking up this same tone that she's sort of poking fun at. Like, the whole thing is very tart and winky, and it also just seems to be citing things that I felt a little bit lost by this one. Like, I felt like I needed, like, this felt a little bit like a you had to be there kind of thing.
She might be talking, this might be part of a conversation that was happening at the time that we're totally unaware of. So but that's that one. The next one, Confused.
Annie Get Your Gun by D.A. Powell, which is a lot about sardines. So he kind of takes up the sardine as a governing metaphor to talk about poetry, and the point seems to be that sardines all meld together into a collective, whether you're eating them out of the can or the tin, or they're swimming all together in a school, which is a bad strategy for them because they still get eaten in large amounts anyway. All that schooling does them nary a whit of good, and yet they still join instinctually, each one believing that it's some other poor pilchard who will be devoured. And then he kind of rags on artistic schools, but then it seems like kind of the meat of the essay, which is also, I think, what they pulled from at the top, I was really baffled by. So he says, maybe it's peculiar to our time in which actual schools, academies, proliferate and spawn that we're seeing so much centrism. What we need is more excentrism. Who isn't tired of the contemporary qua contemporary? Who isn't bored by innovation for innovation's sake? It has, sadly, become the mode du jour. Not even a school, a monocultural fish farm, an orchestra in which everyone is trying to solo at the same time, a tin of silvery bodies falling into place. I imagine that each of those fish must have thought it was going in a new direction, but all the other fishes got there at exactly the same time, and thus the great net encompassed them all. So it seems to be arguing against conformity, but then against non-conformity? I just am baffled by this. I don't know what to make of this.
I was less baffled because I felt, again, kind of called out by this.
Oh, okay.
Because it's a little bit like what Pam was saying when I chatted with her about people trying to be experimental for experimentalism's sake and trying to out-experimental each other. And I guess in the context of the language poets being such a big deal at the time, that thing of who isn't tired of the contemporary qua contemporary, you can see where he might be coming from there. Everybody is trying so hard to be original and different, but even if you think you're going in a new direction, because you're all trying to be different in the same way, it's just like contributing to the school settings.
Right. Okay. All right. Like against the avant-garde as a style.
Like, I think that's it.
Okay. All right. That makes more sense then. Yeah. What else did you get from this one? Because I've read very little D.A. Powell and sorry,
me too. Yeah. No. It really was that paragraph that you pulled out that I felt like was the most interesting and relevant.
The one I got least out of. But no, I actually think like you I think clarified what that might have. Yeah. I think that does make more sense now. Monocultural fish farm, an orchestra in which everyone is trying to solo at the same time. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That is the line for me, and I need to keep that in mind because I don't know. You got to have a pretty strong idea if you're going to come up and say, "This is my solo, guys." I don't think I've had one of those yet.
What is that? Apart from just the bad judgment and arrogance required to like get up and read a poem or to like write a poem and try to publish it, what is there's a sense in which like of course like any poem, unless you're writing some weird collaborative thing, like any poem is a solo. So what is in what way do you feel like some of your poems you'd feel more implicated by than others?
Oh, just those moments where I thought, I don't think anybody's done this. I'm going to do this thing and it's going to be original and interesting. I'm really going to add to the conversation.
Right, okay.
No, somebody already did it like 16 million times.
Like the originality is the draw. When that's what you're after, you're maybe off the track.
Pretty much always.
Yeah. I really, Alicia Stallings in conversation said like, and she's clearly like one of the most like white hot intelligent people I've met in person, but she said like her dad told her as a kid like never like ground your sense of self on being the smart one, because all it takes is you're going to meet someone smarter than you.
No, that's such great advice.
like never be like, well, I'm the smart one, because it's just like you'll be so owned when you just meet the wrong person. Yeah.
Oh God. Yeah. Great advice.
And then the next one was Thomas Harris Ellis's The New Performiform, A Page versus Stage Alliance. Do you want to take this one up?
How about you take it?
This was so some of these I found annoying in different ways. This one I thought basically has a pretty good thesis, I think, but it's presented in a just totally insufferable way.
It's really just very hard to read.
It's so he's doing like playful things with language, but it makes the language opaque.
Yeah, it just loses me completely, except for the very, very end. Can I read that bit?
Yes.
So he ends by saying, and while it is rare to attend a poetry festival or conference and see poets, established and emerging, white and black, gay and straight, academic and non-academic, being treated as equals, consequently it is even rarer to discover literary editors and publishers open to all levels of class intelligence. And that seems really right to me and still applicable, I think.
What does class intelligence mean?
I take that as meaning have you left school around year 10? Or have you gone all the way and done your PhD, and do you have the vocab to throw around that reflects that? Oh,
see, I was thinking initially that it was like class consciousness, but that doesn't seem.
Oh, maybe that is it.
I don't know. It's I don't really. But then again, I don't trust. He's so capricious in his use of language in this essay that it's hard to know whether like a standard meaning should be applicable here. Class intelligence. I'm not getting any meaningful, and I'm not getting any meaningful results from this. So I don't know. It doesn't seem to be jargon. But yeah,
okay,
that is certainly true. That like go to like poetry festivals and conferences are so hierarchical, and that's certainly true of literary magazines and publishers as well. The first task of activism of any performer, which is one of his bizarre coinages, is the removal of all one-dimensional judges of craft, which I read as like more so than like the hate socialist collective is super histrionic in their politics. That I read as like maybe the most radical line in the whole series of manifestos, because if I understand it correctly, he's saying assassinate judges, like remove one-dimensional judges, like remove them how? Like what does that mean?
No, that's not how I take it.
Okay.
Removal of all one-dimensional judges. I think that's another weird way of using the word judges, like one-dimensional measures of craft. So that's how I take that.
Less alarming.
Yeah, judges can be there. That's okay,
Yeah.
but they need to be looking at craft from more than one angle.
Right. Yeah, that seems right. And overall, the thesis seems to be that like page poets and stage poets should learn from each other's strengths. And like that seems like a good thesis, but it is horribly, horribly written, like aggressively, obnoxiously written.
But weirdly, this might be the only manifesto that actually we can see that it's kind of come true.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think this one is right. No, I think that's quite right. This one is one of the few ones that is making a specific imperative, like asserting a specific imperative, and then we can. And you're right. I think this like page poetry and stage poetry have become more mutually influential.
Yeah, they've gone closer together for sure. So.
Yeah. So well done, Thomas Sayers Elliott. You won the manifesto off despite, just brutally bad writing in this. The next one is Presto Manifesto by A.E. Stallings.
Mm-hmm.
What did you, so as a mostly free verse poet coming into rhyme and meter a little bit, how did this strike you? Because I remember this is one of the few I know I read at the time, and I remember my response to it then. And it's pretty similar to my response to it now. But how did it strike you?
Yeah, I've read this before as well. Maybe Josh shared it with us or something. But yeah, it's helpful. It's because you do, like when you're coming at this stuff as somebody who has always got this received message that writing in rhyme and meter isn't cool, you should never do it, and then all of a sudden somebody kind of opens that world up to you and you start kind of falling in love with it. It's like, oh no, what's happening to me, what's happening to my life? But then you read this and it's like, no, it's okay, this is just another part of how it works. It's another set of tools that you can use. Like she says, rhymes do not need to be hidden or disguised. They are nothing to be ashamed of.
Yes.
Yeah, and this is probably the most traditional manifesto.
Mm-hmm. It's focused. It's narrow. It doesn't veer off. It sticks to rhyme.
Yeah, So I've gotten a lot from this each time I've read it.
And she is stylish and playful in her language, but some of the, like one of the assertions that stuck with me most was one of the kind of the simpler and plainer ones, which is that there are no tired rhymes. There are no forbidden rhymes. Rhymes are not predictable unless lines are. Death and breath, womb and tomb, love and dove, moon, June, spoon, all still have great poems ahead of them. And that is, I feel like I hear so many complaints about rhyme and the or even like, what's her name? Rebecca Hazelton, who's very smart, but then she'll like vindicate rhyme by saying like, oh, the problem with bad rhyming poetry is that they're picking predictable rhymes. I think like, that's totally the wrong way to think about this.
No, one of the many things that I got out of working with Josh is this understanding that like you can use any of those words, but just make sure that the reader doesn't know that's where you're going to land.
Yeah.
That's a poor description of what he was trying to tell me, but yeah.
No, but it's also related to, I didn't prepare a manifesto, but I kind of prepared an anti-manifesto in response to, because you
shocking.
So no, well, we'll see. I actually, believe it or not, I tried to be all positive in mind, but this will come back in that instance.
Okay.
Yeah, it's like it's playful. Some of it is just she says rhyme schemes, ha ha ha. She is like part of what I think, I associate her with some of the great formal poets, in that she, like A. Hausman, she is a nerd who loves Easter eggs, and like Richard Wilbur, she is a nerd who loves corny puns and things, so I'm a huge fan of hers. But I think this is like a pretty rhyme annoys people, but only people who write poetry that doesn't rhyme, and critics. It's such a cheerful gauntlet.
Yeah, she's so self-assured. She's just so like, whatever, you guys, this is just, there's no problem here. And interestingly, that is the one that got the most comments and the most positive. Like, it's just like a sea of, oh my God, I love you.
So, she also seems to be having the most fun, I think, of any of these.
That's all you ever want, right? Just have fun.
Yeah. I would say, like, Josh seems to be most miserable, but also like most effective. And she's just having a blast. Just run. Her, by the way, like, if you ever read her, because she does good translations of Greek and Latin, her notes on those translations are, I would say, even better. Like, the notes of her on her books are just wonderful. And then there's the last one.
Yeah.
Leave the Manifesto Alone, a Manifesto by Hate Socialist Collective.
Yeah, I don't like this one. I feel like we need to think about the political context a little to really get what they're getting at. So it's 2009. Maybe they were asked to write them in 2008. And the last couple sentences in the first paragraph are, "We will not celebrate the end of that era with you. It was not a poetic era. It was a political era. It is this history you wish to seal over with pseudo-celebrations." So are they kind of saying, like, look, just because Bush is out and Obama is in, this is no reason to be happy?
Yeah, I think it's also like the American left has emerged into the mainstream in the last 6 or 7 years in a way that it totally had not at this point. Like,
that's
you got a little emergence of it with Occupy Wall Street, which was 2011.
Yeah, that sounds right.
2011. So this was a couple years before that, and they make a lot of statements. The manifesto is obligated to be political at every instant, to use the forms and worldviews on offer only for bitter mockery, to be not an alternative to destruction, but a complement, to speak of capitalism and the bourgeoisie, the former as the enemy, the latter defined as the social class which does not want to be named, to stop wringing its hands over poetry's lost popularity, that autocritique more stirring than any Maoists. I think, like, the manifesto is obligated to say there are other countries where poetry still matters, where the war against the marketplace of capital, against the confirmation of the bourgeoisie as the end of history endures. When we say the manifesto, we mean poetry and capital poetry and poets and our own pathetic selves. I think the sort of Marxist-inflected rhetorical fury was less on offer at the time. Like, you can find that, like, anywhere on Twitter or in certainly any literary magazine today. I think it was influential, but was not nearly as prominent as it is now. So maybe this was less annoying then, but I couldn't help Googling them and saying, like, oh, you're both tenured professors. Oh, great. And I'm guessing you were at least tenure track at the time. And like, we're all dancing on the grave of history, and we're self-congratulatory bourgeoisie. And sorry, what are you doing? You're publishing a poetry manifesto in Poetry Magazine. Like, that's your revolution is critique, So those who make a manifesto by halves dig their own graves, which is just hilarious, because it's like, sorry, so what you really need to do is you need to, like, really make a manifesto. Like, you write a really sincere, like, really totally commit with your manifesto. Like, we're not talking about barricades. We're not talking about, like, armed revolt. We're not talking about even, like, policy changes. We're talking about, like, really writing a really hardcore revolutionary manifesto. And I just think, like, come on, guys, like, this is bullshit. Who are you helping?
Fine, but yeah.
What life have you improved with this shit?
Well, there's no manifesto here, though.
Yeah. It feels a little bit like another version of Charles Bernstein's, where it's like they're desperately trying not to be caught out committing to something that could then be overturned.
Yeah.
But they're so super hostile to Poetry Magazine in a way that, like, as much hostility as I have expressed toward Poetry Magazine and the Poetry Foundation, it just feels like bad form in this case. Maybe partly just because they're like honored invited guests publishing a manifesto in Poetry Magazine. It just feels like, so what? At least
Why'd you come in and scream at everybody?
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like at least do a Marlon Brando and like don't accept the, or like a Jean-Paul Sartre and like don't accept the award. You know, like right, you know, like write your own thing on your own like website and say like, we rejected Poetry Magazine's invitation because we think that this is bullshit. But like, don't accept the invitation and then say this is bullshit.
So what do you think about Poetry Magazine then publishing it? What is that move?
I mean, I think it's like Target printing Che Guevara t-shirts. I mean, like they're submitting this as a manifesto and Poetry accepting it demonstrates that neither of them take it seriously.
Just a writing exercise. Yeah.
Yeah. How does it end? And so, like you, O Poetry, we propose to reanimate the manifesto. We will first require the following things: a century of revolutions, delight and terror, shit on the curatorial, shit on bankers and trusts, shit on ourselves. We believe in art for art's sake, the same as we believe in destruction, as our Beatrice. Mallarmé said them both. Poetry must be as violent and loving as the disease called history with which we infect each other, red and black condoms with the reservoirs cut off. Those who make a manifesto by halves dig their own graves. Cool, man. All right. You got like... Do you know the little statue of the defiant girl standing in front of the bull on Wall Street? Yeah. Which is like, like, cool. All right. But also, and like that, at least that, unlike this, that has popular appeal and is relatively clear. But similarly, it's like, and if that's it, then so what? You know, like this is like a less like, a more obscure, less pleasing, more like conflicted version of that also changes nothing.
I guess we just have to hope that wasn't it, and that they went on to do many other things and had a century of revolutions.
I don't know. I'm very cynical about this, but this was also, though, by far the closest to the Futurist Manifesto.
Yeah, I haven't read the Futurist Manifesto, so I'm missing a key piece of information now. I
just read it. I had read it back in the day in college, if at all, and then I read it again today. It's horrible. It's horrible. It's so ranty and free associative and smug and... Come, my friends, I said, let us go. At last mythology and the mystic cult of the ideal have been left behind. We are going to be present at the birth of the centaur, and we shall soon see the first angels fly. We must break down the gates of life to test the bolts and the padlocks. Let us go. Here is the very first sunrise on earth. Nothing equals the splendor of its red sword, which strikes for the first time in our millennial darkness. The actual manifesto is these 11 points. I won't read all of them, but we want to sing the love of danger, the habit of energy and rashness. The essential elements of our poetry will be courage, audacity, and revolt. Literature has up to now magnified pensive immobility, ecstasy, and slumber. We want to exalt movements of aggression, feverish sleeplessness, the double march, the perilous leap, the slap and the blow with the fist. That's the most coherent part of it, which seems to be saying, like, we don't care for the style of the times. Let's jazz things up a little bit. And that part I feel like, okay, fine. But then it goes on to, we want to glorify war, the only cure for the world, militarism, patriotism, the destructive gesture of the anarchists, the beautiful ideas which kill, and contempt for women. Like, all right, like it's so obnoxious and so self-consciously obnoxious. There is a funny tipping of the hand, I think. He rails against museums. He hates museums a lot. But he says, daily visits to museums, libraries, and academies, those cemeteries of wasted effort, cavalries of crucified dreams, registers of false starts, is for artists what prolonged supervision by the parents is for intelligent young men drunk with their own talent and ambition. Which I read is like, oh, this is like the incel revolt. Like, this is like, well, you know what we need? We need less parenting. Down with the parents who won't let us stay up late at night. Down with the parents who won't let us buy a samurai sword. I mean, it just feels like this is, come on, guys. Hold on a minute. I think my air conditioning is kicking up. Hold on. And then they say, and I thought you would appreciate this, having far more time ahead of you than I do, the oldest among us are not yet 30 years old. We have, therefore, at least 10 years to accomplish our task. When we are 40, let younger and stronger men than we throw us in the waste paper baskets like useless manuscripts. They will. So, I mean, it's really just like horrible. It's just like it's almost like a manifesto. It's like, I mean, truly, it's just like a 4-page middle finger. That like, okay. And then we had World War One. Cool guys, great job. like, hey baby, hey Echo, Echo's being friendly. Hey baby girl.
Just to be clear, listeners, Matthew and I are exactly the same age, so I don't know what he's talking about.
I think I have like a few months on you or something. Or
you got a few months, yeah.
Yeah. So we're fucked. We already knew that though.
I definitely know that. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I did want to ask you, like, I wonder about, and I don't think this was 13 years ago. At least a number of these poets were like around 40, I think, or 40-ish at this time. What do you think about like newness or innovation or even just like the impulse to write a manifesto and youth or relative youth? Because poetry youth is different than regular people youth.
Yeah, I think that's really true. Yeah. I think if you're going to write a sincere manifesto, you probably need to have a certain level of confidence in your own thinking that only deteriorates as you get older.
Yeah.
I'm just so much less sure of any declarative statement that I make now. But when I was 25, goddamn, I had a lot to tell you, and it was all very important, and you better listen.
Do you, before you read us your manifesto that you composed for the occasion, do you want to offer any of those nuggets of wisdom that your 25-year-old self might have shouted with great confidence?
Oh, God, yeah. I was very obsessed with the fact that we had no time left. And I remember sitting with a friend of mine in a coffee shop when we were both 30 and just being like, dude, we have to do it now. Like, there's no more time. If we're not going to do it now, when are we going to do it? Like, when is this stuff going to happen?
And we have no more time, just meaning like we need to kind of like Marinetti means it, like we need to do this before we get old. Is that like that? Like we specifically have no more time, or?
Yeah, before we're old and irrelevant and nobody listens to what we have to say and our achievements no longer count.
Right, yeah.
But I guess one of the gifts, I suppose, of getting past that is you realize that nobody cared then, nobody cares now, nobody will ever care. And that's actually the best part. That's a good thing.
Yeah, and thank God nobody was listening at the time.
Thank God nobody was listening. Yeah.
That seems very familiar to me. So you did properly write a manifesto.
I did.
Yeah.
I did do that.
Which is hard to do. Like sitting down and actually, like in a sincere way, trying to write true statements about poetry, especially if there's a slight imperative angle to it, is really hard to do.
It was fun though.
Read it for us.
Okay, so I've called this a collection of declarative statements because I wasn't really sure about the difference between that and a manifesto.
I'm still not sure,
Yeah, I don't know. All right, so all poetry is embarrassing and shameful. These are its best qualities. All poetry is necessary. There are no good poets, only lucky ones. Poems are shitty vessels, poor tools, and terrible teachers. Poems must never be used for any purpose ever. Poetry is poisonous to most humans. You are not the exception. While poets may demand attention or invite pity, it is kindest to ignore them. Any poet who attempts to gain status through poetry guarantees his own social and financial ruin. Poetry is immune to your bullshit. There is no way to prove the existence or non-existence of poetry. Believe in it or don't, but don't make your faith, or lack thereof, someone else's problem. You are always going too fast for poetry. Even after you die, this will be true for at least another 100 years. Those who say they have given up poetry reveal themselves to be its most hopeless addicts. No one enjoys poetry, but it's fun to watch people try to convince themselves that they do. The best thing you can do for poetry is get out of its fucking way.
So this is great, partly because I like, some of these seemed like totally inarguably true. Some of them seemed like completely false to me. And then others I wanted like to get your clarification on how you meant things to tell. So I could tell kind of how you, like any poet who attempts to gain status through poetry guarantees his own social and financial ruin. And I thought of I guess the distinction I was curious about is like, there are people who in the poetry world are ambitious, and often they are quite successful, but is the error trying to make poetry the mechanism of your ascent versus making like some personal or romantic or political or rhetorical maneuver the mechanism of your ascent? Like, there are people who play games to get ahead in the poetry world, and that can work. But like, if you think that the poetry is going to do it, that's the mistake. Is that, or like, how did you mean this, I guess?
Oh, yeah, I see what, yeah. Okay, I can see how that's unclear. I was dreading this part, you guys. So, yeah, I think I was talking about that game playing. So poetry as the social game, the status game. This is where I've been published. This is where I teach. This is the journal that I run. Making that your claim to fame. I don't know. I mean, I suppose there are people who have done that and have led happy and successful lives and died contented.
Oh, I don't know about died contented, but I think there are people who sort of play this game successfully. Like the people who, I think seldom are they the most successful, but often they're in like the upper middle tiers of like poetry world success.
But I think the further down that path you go, the further away you get from poetry.
Yes.
Because then you're attached to the status.
Indeed. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So maybe that's what I mean, is that if you make poetry your measure of status, then poetry will leave you.
Yeah, it's like there's a like a Borgesian paradox that Ryan has proposed, which is that like it would theoretically, like, there are enough residencies and visiting professorships and guest whatevers on offer that if you had no roots and you could move anywhere you wanted at any time, it's theoretically possible to just go from one to another and never have a permanent home. But the only way to do that, first you have to be lucky and the stars have to align anyway. But like, even if you were the kind of person who could do that, you would still have to spend all of your writing time writing applications. So you would just it would just be this sort of hamster spinning in a wheel, and you'd never actually write poems. Poetry.
Yeah, I think that's true for people now. Yeah. Like, I think, yeah.
Yeah, and like that's a kind of an extreme, like, thought experimental version of it, but I think that's something people do, like more drawn out versions of that all the time. You're always going too fast for poetry, even after you die. This will be true for at least another 100 years. I mean, that's like, I feel like at poetry readings or at poetry, like when I'm reading and editing people's work, like I feel like slow down is like almost like that's the most frequent thing I say. Like, slow down with your writing, slow down with your submission, slow down with your reading. Just slow down. You're right.
Yeah, there are a few of these that are like dedicated to listening to Matthew for a year, and that would be one of them.
Ars longa vita brevis, or vita brevis.
And then he just quotes Latin at you, and it's like, what
that is very rudimentary. Yeah, it's and it's actually, it was taken, I believe, originally from, I think, Hippocrates. I think it was originally applied. It was translated from Greek, and it was applied to medicine. Like, medicine is such a long labor; it takes forever to learn it all, which is still has only become more true. Poetry is poisonous to most humans. I don't understand that one.
Well, think about how much angst and worry and comparison. Think about early episode of yours. We talked about how, was it Rambo's mum?
Yeah.
I just
Baudelaire's
wish.
mom. Yeah.
Baudelaire's mum. I always get those two
Yeah.
mixed up. The one thing I wish is that he'd never gotten into poetry.
Okay.
The drugs and the rest of it is fine.
Yeah. The life of poetry is poisonous to most humans. Like writing poetry. Because I think it's if you're talking about poetry as like the material or the like words that you like, there are plenty of people who read poetry. Well, there aren't plenty of people. Well, like that's not poisonous. What's poisonous is like saying I'm going to devote my life to it.
Yeah, that's a good clarification for sure. Yeah, I'm thinking of poetry as a substance that you start to mess around with.
Yeah. And maybe that's part of is like there are precious few people who ingest it regularly and don't come to at least wish for or long for something. Like it maybe in that sense it is pretty poisonous. Those who say they have given up poetry reveal themselves to be its most hopeless addicts. I think that's pretty true. No one enjoys poetry. That I feel like I really want to resist that one. I am so irritated by the poetry world, and I read, and there's so much bad poetry, but like what puts fire in my belly about this topic is that I do enjoy poetry. Like it's treated as if no one enjoys it often. And I think a lot of the poetry that we deal with in public conversations or in poetry readings, people don't enjoy. But like there is enjoyment to be had in poetry, and it's like it like more like frankly confronting that is what I wish we were doing. It's why like I am less bothered by Ada Limon than I am by Ocean Vuong, because like I think people really like her. Like I think people are actually like her poems, and I think with Ocean Vuong there's a lot more. Well, I can't speak to his prose, but I think there's a lot more. I think there's a lot more like jumping on a bandwagon with Ocean Vuong. I think there's a lot more like this is the thing that is supposed to be cool. I think it's hard to read his poems and think like somebody really digs this.
Oh, I don't find that at all. See,
oh yeah, okay.
And I'm going to contradict my point here, but I've definitely read poems of Ocean's and gone, yeah, that's a great line.
Okay.
And I could totally imagine people enjoying it, no question.
All right. Well, yeah. I mean, that if you really enjoyed it, and like the same goes for like Insta poets or pop poets, Billy Collins. If you genuinely enjoy it, I mean, I think it's good, but like fine, like then there's no bad faith happening. But I think there's so much bad faith happening in the poetry world, and there's so much interaction with poetry where there's not even an expectation of genuine enjoyment. But yeah, that one I resisted. And then the existence or non-existence of poetry, I'm curious about how you meant that.
What I'm trying to get at there is, don't you love it when writers start a sentence?
I'm trying to get at.
What the fuck?
What he's trying to say. Yeah, I think what. Yeah.
Shut up. Okay, so what I'm saying is, we get so wound up about what is poetry and where does it begin and end and how do we define it and what does it do?
Right.
And so I was trying to encapsulate that all those things. No way to prove, like, it's there or it's not, but can we just stop having that conversation because it's a huge distraction from the work and it's clearly there or it's clearly not there, but just whatever.
Echo, hold on a minute. Echo's tearing up this map. Echo, stop. But I was really impressed that you did this. Like I was sort of startled that you like took it up as a challenge because it just seems like so horribly daunting to me. So mazel tov.
I'm trying to, if I'm going to criticize stuff, I'm trying to think about whether it's something that I could even approach, I guess. So I thought if I was going to sit around picking apart other people's.
Yeah. No, you were an extremely. You win the good sportsmanship award for
That's
this
what I was
podcast.
going for. Yes.
Yeah. So I started to kind of try to think about some declarative statements. I think I do end up spending a fair amount of time ranting them out on this podcast. So I try to kind of come at a different question that has been eating at me a little bit, which is like there are plenty of circles in which it's almost impossible to talk about whether poetry can even be good or bad. And like one of the angry letters to the editor in this issue of Poetry was about like, this critic clearly thought that he could say that something was good or bad. Don't we all know that's impossible? How dare he? And so I do think like that's a conversation that is hard to have. But then even when one accepts that, like, yeah, okay, I think like there are some poems that are better than others, and this works kind of well, and this doesn't work as well. It occurred to me that there are like, so Jonathan was reading through the manuscript of my second book before I was sending it out, and it was funny, like in a couple of poems, he pointed at them and he said, you should cut these. And he explained why. And it wasn't just the old, like, oh, I was going for that. Like he was specifically naming a deficiency that was a virtue that I prize. like he was naming the sort of the spareness and universality of it as the fault.
Okay.
Like what he really wanted was like a rich, detailed specificity. And of course, like I can also enjoy that, but it occurred to me that like in talking about poetry, there's a pretty long list of virtues that poetry can have. Like, and some of them are directly contradictory. And like two that came to mind would be like timeliness versus timelessness. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Right. And like those can both be virtues that people really prize. They tend not to go hand in hand. They tend to, universality versus specificity. I don't know, intensity versus subtlety maybe would be another way to, they're not all perfect oppositions, but I think like they're in like, I thought of this, or like I thought about this because of some things that Shane and Cameron were saying. And I think even you have a slightly different palette. And like, Cameron is really interested in linguistic invention. And I recognize that. And there are times when I appreciate it in a particular instance, but like as a virtue, generally speaking, in poetry, it doesn't really interest me. So I made a list of a lot of the virtues that I have recognized in poems and that I think some people really look for in poems. I like even like teaching the story writing class. One of my students said like, oh, well, I like to have a character that I can relate to that everything's going to work out for in the end. And I thought like, oh, like I certainly understand wanting to be able to connect with a character, whether or not you identify with that character exactly, but the like, then like part of what I'm going to the story for is then I would like to see everything work out for her. And like, that's a thing people want. And like, that's a thing a lot of very successful books provide, but it's not generally what I'm looking for when I go to a story. But it just made me think about like, rather than arguing like, this is poetry, this isn't poetry, or like poetry can be good or it can't be good. Or like, it just made me think about like, well, what about just identifying what virtues one cares about? So like some of the virtues I listed were, I said already, universality, specificity, timeliness, timelessness, titillation or something like that, sensational, being sensational, constellation, simplicity, intensity, wit, humor, subtlety, surprise, complexity, novelty, beauty. And I have an appreciation for all of those, and I can find them more or less moving. But then I thought like, all right, well, when I really respond to poetry, like when I read through a book of poems I have not read before, or when I return to poems I really love, what is the constellation of virtues that I really respond to? And I think I identified them as clarity, poignancy, accuracy, and elegance. And I think like that same constellation, I think probably like Cameron and to a lesser extent Jonathan would say is sort of boring. And I can find like
boring.
Well, no, but like there are like poems that I find to be really like perfect, and that I think I feel confident that like a lot of very smart people who think smartly about poetry and read it smartly, and like we were talking about Toby Martinez de los Rivas, who there was a whole scandal about him that we recorded a thing about, Cameron and I, but like his poetry, he's super smart, and his poetry is doing like interesting, challenging things. It just leaves me cold. I just get nothing from it. And I think it's because it's not really interested in any of those four virtues. And again, I don't like, I also care a lot about beauty, but if I'm honest, it's probably fifth on the list, right? So it just made me think about like that is a way to have a conversation about good and bad poetry that feels like maybe there's a little less just like of an impasse.
Yeah, because you get to decide what actually matters to you. So of the qualities,
that's not at all a comprehensive list. That's just a list.
No.
I came up with. Yeah.
For sure, yeah. And it's that thing of like, ideally you want all of them, but
right.
To me,
well, but some of them contradict each other. Like I think you can't have all of them, and like maybe some of the best poems have really strongly achieve lots of them, you know. But I think like part of the exercise for me was not just saying like, which sprinkles do I want in my yogurt today, but also like trying to recognize, well, what is it I respond to? Yeah. Like when I love these poems, what is it what really gets to me about them? So yeah, I'm curious how you might characterize your constellation.
Yeah, and
or refute my rambling non-argument.
No, I think this is a great way to look at it. It reminds me a bit of what psychologists will do with you, where they'll get like a set of values cards, and they'll be like, you need to pick your 5 values.
God. That's the most devastating.
I didn't mean that as an insult.
Oh man,
I think that's
brutal,
a useful exercise.
Where on this chart of smiley faces do you where is your pain?
Come on.
All right, sorry. Go ahead.
I think that's a useful exercise, and one of the reasons is that you do get to put some things like way out in the corner where you're like, I don't care about that. Mm-hmm. But then you realize that there's a whole bunch of stuff that you're like, yeah, I'm sort of into that, and then there are these things that you're like, I need this.
Yeah, this
needs to be part of it. I relate to your constellation quite a bit. There are poems that do that I think I do really like, but for me, the one that stands out the most is complexity.
Okay. All right.
I always come back to this idea of wanting to see the rough edges.
Yeah.
And so this is where I keep wanting to ask you about Robert Frost,
right?
Because I feel like he must be somewhere in the background for you.
Yeah.
And he is for me as well.
Yeah.
But the thing about Frost is, no, I don't even know if I can say that there's not complexity, because like a poem like Mending Wall is pretty complex.
And that's one of my least favorite of his poems.
Really?
Yeah. Like
that's a poem. Let's fight about it.
Yeah. It's funny. Everybody, like every smart person I know loves that poem, and I know there's a lot to admire in it, and it totally doesn't interest me.
Why?
Yeah, I think, all right. So that the maybe part of the argument I'll make is that in that poem is not one of his dialogue poems, but it's a cousin to his dialogue poems. Mm-hmm. Do you know, like the Death of the Hired Man, or what's the other one? The what's the one about the child graves? What's that called?
Oh yes,
it's not Buried Child, because that's the Sam Shepard play. Those poems are accomplished, and I recognize, like, okay, you did a good job, Robert, but I find them very dull, and it's partly because I love plays, like I love dialogue, and as dialogue poems go, those are just fine, but like, if you're gonna start doing that, like, just give me Eugene O'Neill. Mm-hmm. Like it to me, it feels like tepid drama, whereas it's sort of like, it's dynamic verse, but like I'd rather have like an actual scene. Like if I'm gonna read poetry rather than dialogue, I would rather have like a piercing lyric, whereas like this is dipping its toes into the realm of like, or like Mending Wall is a little bit like a short story or something, or a play, and it feels like there are different ways to achieve that sort of richness and bitter sweet complexity that I find really effective in short stories, in lyric nonfiction, in plays, but it's not, it doesn't knock my socks off as a poem. Whereas, like, I think like probably my favorite of his poems is, well, I don't know if it's my favorite, but a favorite of his poems is Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening, which I think is like maybe the poem of clarity, poignancy, accuracy, and elegance par excellence. Like that's it. Like that's the, that's about as perfect as it gets.
Yeah, I love that too. And I think it has what I want as well, which is at the very end, there is a bit of complexity. The woods being lovely, dark and deep, like the temptation.
Yeah.
In that is so interesting to me.
Yep.
It's like, why the fuck do you want to walk off into the woods, Robert? What's wrong?
Yeah.
Is everything okay, man?
Yeah. Which is why, like he's I like him because he's so bleak. His vision of things, like that's part of what I really enjoy. Part of what I really enjoy in his work, and like the even like the Ovenbird, I think similarly has like that's not as elegant a poem, that's not as perfect a poem, but it has a similar dark vision of the world and of poetry. Yeah. So it's funny that you would say, I think complexity, I see that. And I almost wonder if there's another, because you've talked about rough edges a couple of times, and I wonder if that's the right word for that, because that's complexity is like the involvement of many elements in one entity.
Yeah.
And there's another thing, which is like roughness or unfinishedness or honesty, maybe, is part of that. Like
honesty,
like a nakedness. So like and those, it's funny, like those virtues, the virtues in that ballpark are some of the least compelling to me.
Okay.
Like honesty is not it. Like it's there's something other than honesty that's like that I know it's a virtue, and I think it's the thing you're talking about, which is like showing the things, showing the seamy side. And
it's like the photographic for me.
Yeah.
A photo that captured something you didn't realize was there.
Right. What would be the word for that? What is that virtue? Because it is a specific thing. It's not quite exactly the same as honesty. It's not quite exactly the same as complexity. But that I know that virtue that you're talking about, and I recognize it as a virtue. It just doesn't interest me.
Why not?
I don't know. I mean, but that's part of what I'm like. Part of my exercise with this list has been like, I think when I have tried to talk about good and bad poetry in the past, I've often tried to construct arguments about like, well, here's what a poem is doing and how it does that, and here's why you need this virtue. Whereas I'm trying this time to say like, well, what do I respond to? Whether or not I should respond to it, whether or not I can come up with a good argument for it, whether or not it makes sense, like what do I actually respond to? And what do
and
I
you're
just
not entirely in control of that either.
No, I think I'm very much I'm mostly not in control of it. I think you can develop a taste for something. You can, and so maybe part of the lesson of this list is like, maybe it's worth developing a taste for some of these other things that are farther away. I think like it's like what you like, but also maybe like be open to liking some things that you haven't learned to like yet.
Yeah, but coming back to that thing of like only having a short amount of time left. Do you think that
I only have I've got like a couple months left on this on Marinetti's clock. Yeah. Oh, less than no, I've got like 1 month left.
Yeah. Yep. Do you think it becomes more difficult, like you become less flexible in your thinking and less open to new stuff?
Probably,
because I think where these virtues come from is it's where you started, right?
Yeah, I think I think probably some of it is like characterological, and some of it is like what you're exposed to as a kid, and I think they're all to some extent acquired, I think, but that doesn't make them any less sincere, right? Or genuine, like they're like you learn to like the foods that you like for the most part. Like very few of us have like an innate palate when it comes to food. We just have these like little naked baby tongues that can't stand anything that's not really mild, and then they get duller over time as you smoke cigarettes and scrape away all the sensitivity to them until you just need to pour Cholula and everything in order to taste anything at all. So yeah, like I think probably we become less open to new poetic experiences over time, just as we become less open to new experiences of any type.
Yeah. It's funny, like reading that Charles Bernstein manifesto, I was looking at it and just thinking, God, 25-year-old me is so fucking impressed by this. Like, I'm so into it. And now I'm just like, I don't have time. I'm so busy.
The thing that I do still find interesting is when I see what strikes me as a very sincere response to something, I then am curious about, like, okay, what would it be like to love this? Like, what would be happening in me if I loved this? And sometimes the response is like my response to Ada Limon, which is like, oh, not that much. Like, that's not that interesting. And sometimes it's a little more complex. Like when I read Jane Eyre as a 35-year-old man, I was like, if I were a 15-year-old girl, this would be the greatest book ever written. And I think it is a terrific book. I just think, like, it wasn't for me at the time. Like, it was not meant for me at the time. And I mean, I think, or like I'll read, reading old poems or writing from other places and times, I'll think, like, what would it be like to be the kind of person who, like, when Odysseus is like, cut the noses off all of my maids who slept with the suitors, and then be like, ha 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 ha, good one, Odysseus. Like, what would it be like to be that person for whom that would be the first response? Like, nice going, like, rather than just like horror and nausea. Yeah. So yeah, I think, like, I do that. I enjoy that exercise, like trying to imagine my way into a certain kind of response, but only if I believe someone genuinely has enjoyed it. Like, in so much contemporary poetry I read, I think, like, fuck you. Like, you didn't even think this was a good poem. Like, you didn't submitting this to the magazine, you thought, I could publish it. Like, fuck you for that. Like, no, don't submit it unless you think it's, at least, it doesn't have to be your best work, but, like, at least think that somebody's going to say, like, oh shit, that's nice. Like you at least have to have that feeling about it, Mm.
Well, I've definitely been the person sending something in, being like,
"Oh, me too.
I'll take this."
Of course, of course, we're all guilty of having done that. But I think, like, I only am interested in trying to imagine my way into loving something if I think somebody has loved it. I just don't think, I don't think most stuff out there has been loved. But like, I don't know. I'm more cynical about that than you are.
Well, I don't mind, it's kind of what I was trying to say at the end there. Like,
yeah.
No one enjoys poetry, which obviously, like, it's an intentionally huge declarative statement that I would never really make.
Yeah.
Except that I just did. But there is I agree with you. There's a lot of should in the way that I think we end up approaching poetry, because it is treated like it's fragile. And it needs our help and our loving attention. And so I think things are given more credit than they need. And a lot of the time, probably a lot more credit than they're due.
That was my conversation with Alice. You can find her, as always, on her podcast app, Poetry Says. You can't find her on Twitter anymore. Good for her. Thank you all for listening. You can reach me, as always, at sleerickets@gmail.com or on Twitter at sleerickets. And here is a little excerpt from my conversation with Brian. It's the whole episode. It's a good long one. It's on The Secret Show. Go to sleerickets.substack.com if you want to hear it. We talked about a really good article by Thomas Nagel called What Is It Like to Be a Bat, as well as a children's story by Randall Jarrell called The Bat Poet. But first, we talked about this stupid shit. I had a very scientific experience giving.
When you add the word "very" to scientific,
or experience,
it really makes it really scientific.
I have a scientific anecdote for you.
Exactly.
So for Easter, I got my children presents, which is Easter is now like a miniature Christmas. It's terrible. It's ridiculous, but
it's awful.
Do you do Easter too?
Yeah, my wife's mother is a huge Easter lady.
Okay.
And my
Yeah,
idiot
yeah.
kids still believe in the Easter Bunny, which is, I mean, Owen is going to be 9 in July, and he questions the shit out of everything. Like, you can't get through a meal without him saying,
Right. Why
like,
should
is
I
that
trust your
fork
authority?
with metal or plated silver, and is it valuable, and could I sell it? And if I can sell it, why don't we sell it? Or like, is when you have twins, does that mean you have to have sex twice? And if you have sex only
That's a smart
once, and
question.
they're no, it's great. And it's like, but if you like, how long does sex take? And is 10 minutes? Is that boring? Do you get bored during sex? And it's like, well, if you don't, why not? Because it feels good. But like, things that feel good still get boring, right? So like, everything he questions. With the Easter Bunny, he's like, oh, I guess the Easter Bunny knew I was having a sleepover this weekend because he came the next day. Like I get it's a willful suspension of disbelief, but I don't. And once in a while he'll ask me, he'll be like, does the Easter Bunny know about daylight savings? Or like, does the Tooth Fairy, how many kids does each Tooth Fairy go to?
Yeah. Tooth Fairy's real flimsy. That one's hard.
Oh, it's the worst. It's the worst. And with Santa, I mean, because Jews don't do this shit. Like, that's, I don't, but with Santa and the Easter Bunny, I'm just like, I don't have that kind of connect. Like, ask mom about the technicalities of how that works.
Yeah.
But yeah, Easter is worse than Christmas because Easter, all the presents are chocolate and sugar, and it just makes the kids into overstimulated lunatics, and the rest of the day is terrible. And there's nothing there other than like a meal that they don't really want to eat. Like, I don't like, there's
because they're full of chocolate.
Because they're full of chocolate, and they don't like want to eat the rabbit prepared by. My mother-in-law makes bunny.
Wait, she does rabbit? She serves rabbit on Easter? That seems like a funny choice.
Yeah. Cool, right? And they don't, is that the same bunny? Is that, no, it's a totally different species.
He's like Jesus, like he's, or the phoenix, like he gets sacrificed.
He is the body, right? Exactly. He takes the sacrifice. So my kids still believe in the Easter Bunny. Do you celebrate Easter? It's just like Christmas. Carry on.
Yeah. My daughter will, in a very bored voice, tell you that it is the celebration of the goddess Yostra. Because I'm sick of.
God, I love how we're all abusing our kids in different ways.
Yeah. Oh, and the worst is my because my 4-year-old is so bad and so like oppositional. She asked to see a picture of the Easter Bunny, and Joanna has tried to turn the Easter Bunny into give it like a Santa logic, but it's really becoming more like Krampus, until she was like, show me a picture of this Easter Bunny. And we showed her a picture of the bunny man from Donnie Darko.
Just the big face.
So, like horrifying. So she's terrified of the Easter Bunny now. And anytime she's being bad, Joanna's like, oh, did I hear a thump on the porch? And she'll shoot up the stairs in terror. So that works pretty well for us. But
murder goblin happens to give you candy once a year for Jesus's
unless it eats you.
Yeah.
But I didn't want to give them candy, so I got them dumb toys and things. And I went to the toy store and got these stupid little mystery prize toys from Playmobil. Okay. And I realized when I got them that it was they were little figures, like a little person. And there's some half were pink and half were blue. And my little daughter is very into pink princess stuff. My older daughter is very against pink and princess stuff and doesn't like it at all right now, which just makes sense. So I got the little one a pink one and the older one a blue one. Because girls can have boy toys, of course, blah, blah, blah. So then they opened them on Easter morning, and my little pink princess daughter opened a beautiful angel in golden armor with a giant spear and huge white wings, right? And my older daughter opened her blue boy packet, and it was a guy with a mustache and a bandana handing out coupons.
What are you talking about? What does it have to do with Easter? How do you know there were coupons?
But it's
they were so small.
They were little plastic chits that said coupon on them. No. And they were in a bag. He had a satchel, and they were in a satchel. And he had a shirt. For? He was wearing shorts, cut-off shorts, and a shirt that said party. It said party on his shirt.
What are you talking about?
So I was like, this is the feminine and the masculine identity of our time. And it was Ethan's right. Everything's
a warrior queen.
We need to go see the Northmen right now.
Yeah. whatever the company that sold you those eggs thinks about like the ideal man versus the ideal woman, I think maybe will drive more people to see The Northman.
They were all right. All the trend pieces were right.
I believe 30% of that story that you just told. Coupons.